The stars twinkled in the blackness of space as the mighty alien warship approached Earth. Captain Kalara, the fierce leader of the Drathar Legion, stood in the command center. Her golden eyes narrowed as she gazed at the blue planet below. She had heard rumors of Earth, its people, weak and fragile, compared to the Drathar and their galactic empire. "Captain," a voice called from behind her. It was Zarnak, her second in command. "The human ship has landed. Shall we begin?" Kalara turned to face him, a smile playing on her lips. "Let's see if these humans are truly as pathetic as the rumors suggest. Prepare the warriors." The Drathar had come to Earth for a simple reason: to challenge its people, to test if they were worth considering in the grand cosmic scheme. Kalara had no respect for Earthlings. They were soft, their technologies primitive, and their strength laughable. Minutes later, the airlock hissed as the doors opened, and a figure emerged. It was a human, standing just under 6 feet tall, dressed in a simple military uniform. His name was Sergeant Jason Hale, a human soldier who had been selected for this momentous encounter by Earth's top leaders. He was strong, yes, but against the mighty Drathar, he didn't stand a chance. The alien warriors stood in a row, their muscular bodies towering over him. Kalara eyed him from head to toe, her lips curling into a mocking grin. "Is this the finest warrior Earth has to offer?" Kalara scoffed, her voice rich with condescension. "This tiny creature is all you have to offer." Jason didn't respond immediately. He had trained for months for this moment, and he wasn't going to let their mocking words shake him. Instead, he stood tall, gazing back at the aliens with quiet confidence. "You'll see soon enough," Jason replied, his voice calm but firm. Zarnak, ever the eager one, stepped forward and swung his fist in the air. The movement was quick, but Jason's eyes were faster. He dodged, stepping to the side with a fluid motion, then countered with a quick jab to Zarnak's chest. The alien stumbled back, surprised by the human's agility. Kalara raised an eyebrow. "Impressive," she muttered, "but let's see how he fares against me." The Drathar captain moved with the speed of a predator, closing the distance between herself and the Earthling in the blink of an eye. Jason's training kicked in as he blocked her first strike, his hands locking around her wrists to prevent the crushing blow from landing. Kalara's eyes widened in surprise. Most of her enemies would have been flattened by now. "You're stronger than you look," she said, a hint of respect slipping into her voice. Jason smirked, stepping back and assuming a defensive stance. "You haven't seen anything yet." The mockery in the air faded as the tension between the two grew. Kalara had expected this to be an easy conquest, but now she was curious. What was it about this Earthling that made him stand his ground so easily? He wasn't just a soldier. There was something more in his eyes. Around them, the other Drathar warriors exchanged glances, unsure of how to react. They had never encountered an Earthling with such resilience. Their weapons were advanced, their armies vast. But this human seemed different. "Perhaps we should give him a real test," Kalara mused, her grin turning to one of calculation. She stepped back, signaling her warriors to form a circle around Jason. It wasn't enough to just face him one-on-one. If he was truly a threat, he would have to prove it in front of all of them. The alien captain was determined to break him, to show her warriors that Earthlings were nothing but weaklings. But something deep inside Jason told him this was only the beginning. He had trained for this moment, not just for a physical battle, but for the mental war that was about to unfold. He wasn't afraid of these aliens, and he certainly wasn't going to let them see him fail. As the circle closed in on him, Jason prepared for what would come next. Little did Kalara and her warriors know, this Earthling was about to teach them a lesson they'd never forget. The tension in the air grew thick as the circle of Drathar warriors tightened around Sergeant Jason Hale. Kalara watched closely, a cold smirk playing on her lips. She had faced hundreds of enemies, but this human, this Earthling, was different. He stood tall, unfazed by their intimidating presence. There was a fire in his eyes, a spark that made Clara hesitate for just a moment. She had expected an easy fight. She had expected to crush this human with a single move, to make an example of him in front of her warriors. But something about his calmness, his confidence, made her think twice. "You think you can defeat us?" Clara asked, her voice like ice. "You are nothing compared to the might of the Drathar." Jason didn't reply. He simply watched her, waiting for her next move. Clara raised her hand, signaling for the warriors to step back and give her space. She wasn't done testing him. Not yet. "You're strong for a human," Clara admitted, her eyes scanning Jason's physique. "But strength alone won't save you here. We have power, technology, and centuries of battle experience. You've only just begun to understand what you're up against." Jason stood his ground, his muscles tense but under control. He had trained for this. He had prepared himself for the strength of the Drathar. He knew he wasn't the strongest fighter, but he had something that none of them had: determination. Suddenly, with a blur of movement, Clara lunged at him again, faster than before. Jason reacted quickly, stepping aside and grabbing her arm as she passed, twisting it with precision. But Clara wasn't unskilled. She immediately twisted her body, using her other arm to counter. They were locked in a deadly dance, each one testing the other's strength, skill, and endurance. Around them, the Drathar warriors remained silent, watching the fight unfold. They had never seen an Earthling move like this before. They had heard the stories of human resilience, of their ability to fight against odds far greater than themselves. But seeing it firsthand was different. This human wasn't afraid. He wasn't backing down. Clara pushed Jason back with a powerful shove, her golden eyes blazing with determination. "You're strong, but it's not enough. You will fall like all the others." Jason didn't flinch. "We'll see about that." He circled Clara, waiting for the right moment to strike. He couldn't just fight her strength with strength. He had to outsmart her, use his agility, and rely on the training he had received. This wasn't just a battle of muscles. It was a battle of wits. Suddenly, Clara made her move. She swung a fist toward him, but Jason ducked under it, moving with incredible speed. As she turned to face him, Jason seized the opportunity. He grabbed her by the arm again, this time twisting it with a firm grip. But instead of using his own strength, he leveraged Clara's momentum, throwing her off balance. Clara stumbled but quickly regained her posture, her eyes narrowing. She had underestimated him. This human wasn't just a brute force. He was clever. And that made him more dangerous than she had originally thought. "Impressive," Clara said, rubbing her arm where Jason had twisted. "You're not what I expected." Jason wiped the sweat from his brow, his breathing steady. "You're not exactly what I expected either." The Drathar warriors exchanged glances, murmuring among themselves. This Earthling had surprised them. They had expected him to be weak, to crumble under their pressure. Instead, he was holding his own. Clara stepped back, her face now a mixture of frustration and intrigue. "Enough games. It's time for the real test." With that, she raised her hand again, signaling for her warriors to advance. One by one, the Drathar stepped forward, each one eager to see if this human could truly hold his ground. Jason's heart raced. This was what he had prepared for. He was no longer facing just one enemy. He was facing them all. But he wasn't afraid. He had trained for this moment. His mind raced, calculating his next move, his next step. The first warrior lunged at him, aiming for his midsection. Jason sidestepped, feeling the rush of air as the alien's fist flew past him. He jabbed a quick punch to the warrior's side, causing him to stagger back in surprise. The second warrior came at him from the side, but Jason was ready. He ducked, rolling to the ground and springing back up in a fluid motion. The warrior's attack missed, and Jason delivered a quick kick to his knee, sending the Drathar warrior crashing to the floor. Jason barely had time to catch his breath before the third warrior charged at him. This one was faster, stronger, and more experienced than the others. But Jason had learned one thing in all his training. No matter how fast or strong his enemy was, there was always an opening. With a swift movement, Jason dodged the warrior's strike and used his own momentum against him. The warrior crashed to the ground, stunned but not defeated. Jason wasn't done yet. Clara watched in awe as her warriors fell one by one, defeated by this Earthling's skill and determination. It was clear now. This human was more than just a soldier. He was a force to be reckoned with. "Well done, Earthling," Clara said, her voice now laced with respect. "You've proven yourself worthy. But the battle is far from over." Jason stood tall, his chest heaving, but his resolve stronger than ever. He wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The air around Jason felt thick with tension. His muscles ached from the relentless battle, but his spirit was far from broken. The Drathar warriors who had once laughed at him now lay defeated at his feet. Yet Jason knew this was only the beginning. Clara, the fierce captain of the Drathar Legion, had not been defeated yet. He could see the fire in her eyes, a fire that only grew stronger with every fallen warrior. Clara stepped forward, her golden eyes fixed on Jason. "You're more skilled than I gave you credit for," she said, her voice tinged with both admiration and frustration. "But you've only fought my soldiers. Now you face me." Jason stood tall, sweat dripping from his brow. He was exhausted, but he wasn't about to back down. "I'm ready," he replied, his voice steady. "Bring it on." The Drathar warriors, though defeated, watched in silence. Their leader, Clara, was not someone easily beaten. Jason had proven himself in the first round, but now it was time for the true test. The warriors had never seen a human fight like this before, and they were eager to see how this battle would unfold. Clara raised her hand, signaling her warriors to step back. She knew she had to fight Jason herself. She had underestimated him before, but no longer. This time, she would show him the full might of the Drathar. With lightning speed, Clara lunged at Jason, her fists moving like a blur. Jason barely had time to react as she came at him with all her strength. He dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding her blow, but Clara was relentless. She struck again, faster this time, and Jason barely managed to block her punch. Jason's breath quickened. Clara was strong, faster than any of the warriors he had fought, and her attacks were powerful. But he wasn't backing down. He had trained for this moment, and he knew that the human spirit was stronger than anything Clara had ever faced. Jason countered with a series of quick jabs, aiming for her torso, but Clara easily blocked them. Her strength was overwhelming, but Jason's agility kept him moving just out of her reach. He was smaller, but he was faster, and that was his advantage. "You're quick," Clara said with a grin, her voice filled with admiration. "But you can't keep this up forever." Jason's eyes narrowed as he studied her movements. He knew she was right. He couldn't dodge forever, and his strength was no match for hers. But there was one thing that the Drathar hadn't counted on. Humanity's greatest weapon was not in its strength, but in its resilience. Clara attacked again, this time with a flurry of strikes, each one harder than the last. Jason blocked as best as he could, his body screaming for rest, but his mind remained focused. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. He had to find a way to outsmart her. As Clara swung another powerful punch, Jason saw his chance. He ducked under her blow, rolling to the side, and quickly getting back on his feet. This time, instead of blocking, he anticipated her next move and used her momentum against her. He grabbed her arm as she tried to strike again, twisting it with a move that surprised even Clara. The alien captain stumbled, thrown off balance by Jason's quick thinking. She glared at him, clearly frustrated, but there was something else in her gaze. A grudging respect. She had never fought anyone like this before. This human had something no Drathar warrior had: the ability to think, adapt, and keep fighting no matter the odds. "You're different," Clara admitted, wiping the sweat from her brow. "I've never met anyone like you." Jason, breathing heavily, didn't respond. He knew this wasn't over yet. The battle was far from won, but he had made a breakthrough. He had found a way to fight her, not by strength, but by using his mind. "Don't get too confident," Clara warned, her voice low and dangerous. "This battle isn't over." Jason nodded, ready for whatever came next. He had proven that Earthlings were not to be underestimated, but the final test had yet to come. Clara was still a formidable opponent, and the warriors around him were waiting for their moment to strike. Suddenly, a loud alarm echoed through the room. The Drathar warriors began to stir, their eyes widening in alarm. Clara glanced up, her expression shifting from one of determination to one of caution. Jason's heart raced as he looked around, trying to understand what was happening. The ground shook, and the walls of the chamber seemed to tremble. Clara's eyes narrowed as she turned to face her warriors. "It seems we have a bigger problem," she said, her voice now tense. "The ship is under attack." Jason looked at her, confused. "What do you mean? Is there another enemy?" Clara nodded, her gaze turning hard. "Something is threatening our fleet. We must prepare for a new battle." Jason didn't hesitate. "Then let's fight together," he said, his voice strong and unwavering. Clara studied him for a moment, surprised by his offer. Then, as if making a decision, she nodded. "Very well," she said. "We fight together." The Earthling and the Drathar captain, once enemies, now stood side by side. They knew that the true test of strength was not just in individual power, but in unity and resilience. The battle was not over, far from it. But Jason Hale had shown the Drathar something they hadn't expected: humanity's ability to adapt, to survive, and to fight against impossible odds. Jason stood at Clara's side, his muscles aching, his mind racing. The battle against the Drathar warriors had taken everything out of him. But now they faced something far more dangerous. The ground beneath them rumbled again, more violently this time. The walls of the ship shook, and the sound of alarms blared throughout the room. "What's going on?" Jason asked, his voice sharp with concern. Clara's golden eyes narrowed, her expression hardening. "I don't know," she said, her voice tense, "but we're being attacked. And this enemy is unlike anything we've faced before." Jason glanced around the room. The Drathar warriors, once so sure of their superiority, now looked uneasy. They were trained for battle, but this was different. The tension in the air was palpable, and for the first time, Clara seemed uncertain. "We need to get to the command center," Clara ordered, her voice steady but urgent. "That's where we can assess the situation." Without waiting for a response, she turned and started moving toward the door. Jason followed closely behind, his senses heightened. His body was exhausted, but his mind was sharp. He had fought well against the Drathar, but this was a different kind of challenge. Something out there was threatening the very safety of the ship, and he had no idea what it was. As they made their way through the corridors, Jason couldn't help but notice the nervous expressions on the Drathar warriors around them. They were powerful, yes, but they weren't used to feeling fear. And yet fear was in the air now. When they reached the command center, the scene before them was chaotic. Drathar officers were rushing to their stations, trying to make sense of the situation. The walls of the command center were lined with monitors, each showing a different angle of the ship's exterior. But there was nothing out there, nothing they could identify. Clara stepped forward, her eyes scanning the screens. "Report," she barked. A Drathar officer turned to her, his face pale. "Captain, we've detected an unknown force approaching the ship. It's unlike anything we've ever seen. There are no records of this kind of ship in our databases." Jason peered over Clara's shoulder, his eyes focused on the monitor. The screen showed a large mass moving toward them, but the ship, or whatever it was unlike any technology he had ever seen. It was dark, almost invisible against the backdrop of space. No lights, no visible weapons. It was as if the ship itself blended into the void. "What is it?" Jason asked, his voice low. The officer shook his head. We don't know. It's not responding to our signals. It's almost as if it's cloaked. Clara clenched her fists. This is bad. We can't fight what we can't see. Jason's mind raced. He had seen many battles in his time, but this was different. He had no idea what kind of enemy they were dealing with, but he knew one thing for sure. It wasn't just a threat to the Drathar. It was a threat to Earth, too. And if the Drathar couldn't handle it, humanity would have to step in. He stepped forward, his eyes meeting Clara's. We have to work together on this. The Drathar have the strength, but humans have a way of thinking outside the box. Maybe we can figure out how to fight this thing. Clara looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. She was used to fighting enemies head-on, with brute force. But Jason's words struck a chord with her. This was a different kind of enemy, one that couldn't be defeated with strength alone. Fine, Clara said at last. We work together. But you better be right, Earthling. Jason nodded, his mind already working through the possibilities. He didn't have much time. The unknown ship was closing in, and they had no idea what its intentions were. All they knew was that it was dangerous. A loud beep interrupted his thoughts. The officer at the console looked up, his face pale. Captain, the enemy ship. It's firing on us. Clara's eyes narrowed. Return fire. The officers scrambled to respond, but Jason could see the panic in their eyes. They were trying to lock onto a target that wasn't there. The enemy ship was still cloaked, and without any visible weapons, it was impossible to know where to strike. We need to find a way to track it, Jason said urgently. Can you isolate the energy signature? Maybe we can detect where the ship is by its energy emissions. Clara turned to the officer at the console. Do it. The officer worked quickly, his fingers flying over the controls. The room was silent except for the hum of the consoles and the occasional beep of incoming data. Got it, the officer said, his voice filled with relief. We've isolated an energy signature. The enemy ship is using a unique form of energy. It's faint, but it's there. Jason leaned in, examining the data. We can track it, but we need to get closer. If we can get within range, we might be able to disable its cloaking system. Clara looked at him, her expression intense. Are you sure? Jason nodded. It's our only shot. Without hesitation, Clara gave the order. The Drathar warriors rushed to their stations, preparing for the next phase of the battle. The ship rumbled again as the engines powered up, and the unknown enemy ship closed in. Jason took a deep breath. This wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a battle for the future of both Earth and the Drathar. If they couldn't defeat this unknown threat, everything they had fought for could be lost. The tension in the command center was almost unbearable. The enemy ship, still invisible, was closing in, its faint energy signature just enough to track. Jason stood at Clara's side, his mind racing. They had no idea what kind of technology they were dealing with, but they knew one thing for sure. If they didn't act fast, the Drathar fleet would be in serious danger. Clara's voice broke through the silence. Status report. The officer at the console looked up, his face pale. We're getting closer to the energy signature, but we're still too far to get a clear lock. The enemy ship's speed is increasing. Jason's eyes narrowed as he watched the screen. He didn't like this. The more they moved toward the unknown ship, the more it felt like they were walking into a trap. But there was no choice. If they didn't find a way to disable the cloaking system, the Drathar would be at the mercy of whatever this threat was. Captain, Jason said, his voice steady, we need to get closer. The closer we get, the easier it will be to pinpoint their position. Clara glanced at him, her expression hard but thoughtful. Fine. We move in. The ship rumbled beneath them as it changed course, heading directly for the faint energy signature. Jason felt the gravity shift slightly as the ship's engines adjusted. His thoughts raced. This wasn't just a battle for the Drathar. This was a battle for survival. If this enemy was as dangerous as it seemed, Earth would be the next target. He couldn't let that happen. As they got closer, Jason could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. It was as if the very space around them had become alive with tension. The unknown ship was out there, just beyond their reach, and it was growing more and more powerful with every passing second. Suddenly, the alarms in the command center blared. The ship shook violently, and a red light began to flash. Jason gripped the edge of the console to steady himself. The enemy had made its move. Braced for impact. Clara shouted. The ship rocked again, harder this time, sending the Drathar officers scrambling to maintain control. Jason's heart raced as he gritted his teeth. They had just crossed into the enemy's range, and it was clear that the invisible ship had weaponry far beyond anything the Drathar had prepared for. Clara's voice rang out again, calm but firm. Return fire. Target the energy signature. Jason watched as the Drathar officers fired their weapons, but they were still firing blind. The unknown ship was too well hidden. They needed to find a way to force it out of hiding, to make it visible long enough to strike. Captain, Jason said urgently, if we can create a disruption in their energy field, we might force them to drop their cloaking system. We need something that can emit a powerful energy pulse, something that can overload their system. Clara turned to him, her eyes narrowing. You think that will work? It's our best shot, Jason replied. The Drathar have the power, but humans have creativity. We need to think outside the box here. Clara hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Do it. Now. Jason didn't waste any time. He turned to the officer at the console, his voice firm. Set up a power surge. We need a blast that can disrupt their cloaking field. Use the engines, anything with a high energy output. The officer worked quickly, his hands flying over the controls. Activating surge in 3, 2, 1. The ship groaned as the engines powered up, and then, with a sharp crackle of energy, a pulse shot out from the ship. It cut through space, a bright burst of energy aimed at the location of the invisible ship. For a moment, there was nothing. Then suddenly, the enemy ship flickered into view, its dark form now visible on the screens. It was unlike anything Jason had ever seen, sleek, angular, and almost alive in its design. The surface was covered in strange, shifting patterns, as if the ship itself was constantly changing. It's not just a ship, Jason muttered, staring at the screen in awe. It's like a living organism. Clara gripped her console, her eyes locked on the screen. What is it? I don't know, Jason said, still trying to process what he was seeing. But it's definitely not Drathar technology. It's something alien. The officers worked quickly, trying to lock onto the ship now that it was visible. But the enemy wasn't staying still. It darted around them with incredible speed, moving in ways that didn't seem possible for a ship of its size. Captain, we can't get a clean shot. An officer called out. It's too fast. We can't lock onto it. Clara clenched her jaw. Then we'll have to get closer. We can't let it escape. The ship rumbled again as they changed course, closing in on the enemy. Jason's heart pounded in his chest. He had no idea what they were dealing with, but he knew that if they didn't take it down now, they might not get another chance. Prepare for boarding, Clara ordered. If we can't destroy it, we'll board it and take it from the inside. Jason felt a jolt of determination. This was the moment. This was where humans would show their true strength, not in sheer power, but in ingenuity, in their ability to adapt and overcome. As the two ships drew closer, Jason could feel the weight of the moment. They weren't just fighting for the Drathar now. They were fighting for Earth, for humanity's future in the galaxy. Let's show them what humans are made of, Jason said, his voice low but steady. Clara nodded, her eyes filled with the same resolve. Let's end this. The unknown ship loomed ahead, its strange form now visible in full detail. Jason stood at Clara's side, his pulse quickening as they prepared to board the alien vessel. The ship had been elusive until now, but the Drathar and humans had successfully forced it into the open. The time had come to act. Kalara's voice was steady but urgent. Prepare for boarding. We need to infiltrate their ship and gather intel. If we can figure out what they want, maybe we can stop this before it escalates. Jason nodded. He knew this was their only chance to understand their enemy. If they didn't succeed, the Drathar fleet and Earth would be at risk. His mind raced as he prepared for the next phase. The battle for survival wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The air was thick with tension as the two ships drew closer. The Drathar officers worked quickly, coordinating their actions to make the boarding possible. Jason felt his hands sweat as he gripped the side of the console. The unknown ship was unlike anything he had ever seen. Its surface shifted, almost as if it were alive, responding to the energy pulses from the Drathar ship. It was an intelligent weapon, a living, breathing machine designed for one purpose: destruction. Boarding team, get ready, Kalara commanded. Jason was chosen to be part of the team, a small group of elite soldiers who would board the alien ship and attempt to secure it. He didn't feel like a soldier, not compared to the Drathar. But he had something they didn't. His mind was quick, his thoughts sharp, and in a situation like this, that was an invaluable asset. As the team prepared to board, Jason's thoughts drifted to Earth. His home. He couldn't fail now. The fate of his people, as well as the Drathar, rested on the success of this mission. With a loud mechanical hiss, the airlock opened. The team was ready. Clara, leading the way, stepped forward, and Jason followed closely behind. The other soldiers flanked them, weapons drawn and ready for anything. They moved swiftly, stepping out of the airlock and onto the alien ship. The moment they crossed the threshold, Jason felt a shift in the air. It was colder here, and the walls pulsed with a strange, soft glow. The floor beneath their feet seemed to ripple, almost as if the ship were alive, aware of their presence. Every step they took echoed through the empty halls, and Jason couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Stay alert, Clara ordered in a low voice. We don't know what kind of defenses this ship has. The team moved silently through the alien vessel, their eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. The ship was eerily quiet, with no signs of life. But the tension in the air was palpable, thick with the promise of danger. Jason's instincts told him that the ship's crew was waiting for them to make a mistake. They reached a large central chamber, and Jason's eyes widened as he took in the sight before him. The room was vast, stretching farther than he could see. At the center of the chamber was a massive, pulsating core, its energy rippling outward like waves of light. The core was surrounded by strange, biomechanical structures, each one twisting and turning in a way that defied logic. This is their control center, Clara said, her voice low. We need to find out how it works. Jason moved closer to the core, his mind racing. This was the heart of the ship, the source of its power, and possibly the key to understanding the alien threat. As he approached, he felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of danger. The air seemed to thicken, and he could hear a low hum resonating through the walls. Watch out, one of the Drathar soldiers shouted. Before anyone could react, the core erupted in a burst of light. The chamber shook violently, and Jason was thrown off his feet. He hit the floor hard, but quickly scrambled to his feet. The alien ship was reacting, and it wasn't going to be easy to shut down. Clara barked orders, but her voice was drowned out by the roar of the ship. The core seemed to pulse with increasing intensity, and the walls of the chamber began to shift, closing in on them like a trap. We need to stop this, Jason shouted, his voice barely audible over the noise. There's got to be a way to shut it down. Clara nodded, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of control panels or weak points. We need to destroy the core. If we don't, the entire ship will become a weapon of mass destruction. Jason's mind raced as he looked around. The core was pulsing faster now, and he could feel the heat from its energy growing more intense. He noticed a cluster of consoles at the far side of the room, partially hidden behind the biomechanical structures. "Over there," he yelled, pointing to the consoles. The team sprinted toward the consoles, dodging debris that fell from the walls as the ship continued to shake. Jason's heart was pounding, but he kept his focus. They had no time to waste. Clara reached the consoles first, her sharp eyes scanning the controls. "We need to disable the energy flow to the core," she said, her voice urgent. "Jason, help me." Jason rushed to her side, looking over the control panel. It was alien, completely different from anything he had ever seen, but he knew that if they didn't figure it out quickly, they would all be lost. He saw several switches and levers, each one glowing faintly. He reached out, his hand steady despite the chaos around him. With a deep breath, he activated one of the switches. The core's pulsing slowed, just slightly, but it was enough to give them hope. Clara quickly followed, pressing a series of buttons in rapid succession. The ship groaned, its walls seeming to tremble as the energy flow to the core was interrupted. "We've done it," Clara shouted. But just as they thought they had won, the core began to glow brighter than ever before. "It's not over," Jason said, fear creeping into his voice. "We need to get out of here." Now, the ship trembled beneath their feet, its walls groaning with the strain of the battle raging inside. The core, which had been their target, was still glowing fiercely. Jason could feel the intense heat radiating from it, the energy pulsing like a heartbeat. Despite their best efforts, it was far from over. The ship was on the brink of self-destruction, and they had no way of knowing just how much time they had left. "We have to get out of here," Clara shouted, her voice full of urgency. "If we don't, we'll be caught in the explosion." Jason turned, his eyes scanning the chaos around them. The corridors were starting to collapse, debris falling from the ceiling, blocking their path. He could hear the distant sounds of the alien ship's engines powering up, an ominous hum vibrating through the air. The ship was preparing for something catastrophic, something they couldn't stop. "Jason, this way," Clara called, leading the group toward an escape hatch at the far side of the chamber. She was focused, determined, but Jason could see the fear in her eyes. This wasn't just about the Drathar anymore. It was about the survival of both their people, Earth, and the Drathar, all hanging in the balance. They ran toward the hatch, but as they neared it, the ship gave another violent shake, throwing them off balance. Jason stumbled, but quickly regained his footing. He reached Clara's side just as she reached the hatch's control panel. With a flick of her wrist, she activated the door, and it hissed open, revealing the escape route. But just as they were about to move through, a loud crash echoed through the ship. The floor beneath them cracked open, sending a massive surge of energy across the room. The core, now in a final frenzy, began to release a surge of destructive power. "Go now," Clara yelled, pushing Jason forward as the energy pulse grew stronger. Jason sprinted through the open hatch, followed by the Drathar soldiers. But the ship was crumbling around them. Pieces of the ceiling fell, and the ground seemed to buckle beneath their feet. They could hear the ship's final moments as it began to tear itself apart. The sound of its death echoed in their ears as they ran through the collapsing corridors. Ahead of them, the emergency escape pods were visible, just within reach. But the path was narrowing, the ship's destruction speeding up. They could feel the heat, the increasing pressure as the ship's internal systems began to overload. Jason's heart raced as they neared the escape pods, but he could sense the fear among the crew. Time was running out. "Almost there," Clara shouted. Jason pushed himself harder, running faster than he ever had before. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest, but he knew they couldn't stop. They had to escape, or everything they fought for would be lost. Just as they reached the final stretch, the ship gave one last shudder, and an enormous explosion tore through the chamber behind them. The shockwaves slammed into their backs, throwing them forward, but Jason managed to keep his footing. The heat from the blast singed the air, and he could feel the smoke and dust in his lungs. They reached the escape pods, and Clara slammed the door shut behind them, activating the launch sequence. Jason barely had time to take a breath before the pod shot away from the collapsing ship, breaking free into the cold vacuum of space. For a moment, there was silence. The chaotic sounds of the exploding ship faded into the distance, and they were left floating in the peaceful void. Jason looked out the small window of the pod, watching the alien ship crumble into a fireball of debris, its once mighty form now reduced to nothing. Clara slumped in her seat, breathing heavily but relieved. "We made it," she said, her voice soft with exhaustion. "But it's not over." Jason nodded, glancing over at the other soldiers who were still catching their breath. The battle had been fierce, but they had survived. Yet, as Clara said, it wasn't over. The threat had been neutralized, but there were more questions than answers. They still didn't know who had sent the alien ship or what their true intentions were. And with the Drathar fleet damaged, it was clear that the galaxy wasn't as safe as it seemed. "What happens now?" Jason asked, his voice low but steady. "We regroup," Clara answered, her gaze firm. "We'll take this back to the Drathar High Command. There's a bigger picture here, and we need to figure it out before something worse comes for us." Jason's thoughts drifted to Earth. It was strange to think that humanity's fate had been tied to the Drathar, and yet they had come out of this battle stronger, more united. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing. Humanity had proven itself. They weren't just survivors, they were fighters. Clara glanced at him, her golden eyes steady. "You did well, Earthling. You've earned my respect." Jason gave a small smile, still processing everything that had happened. "I couldn't have done it without you, Clara. We're in this together." The pod drifted into space, carrying them away from the wreckage of the alien ship. The battle was over, but the war, whatever it was far from finished. As they made their way toward the Drathar fleet, Jason knew one thing for certain: humanity would be ready. Whatever the galaxy threw at them, they would stand tall. And this time, they wouldn't be underestimated.